The wind carries dust like prayers across the valley, and Jacob Thorne moves through it like a ghost seeking absolution. His horse's hooves strike the hard-pan earth in a rhythm that matches his heart, steady, purposeful, but weighted with the knowledge that every step takes him deeper into a life he never meant to choose. The cattle ahead of him, stolen from the Whitmore ranch 3 counties over, lumber forward with the resignation of creatures who know they belong to whoever holds the rope. Jacob understands that feeling. He's been holding his own rope for 15 years, ever since the bank took his father's land and left him with nothing but calloused hands and a conscience that grows heavier with each passing season. The barn emerges from the twilight like a cathedral of weathered wood and fading paint, its roof sagging under the weight of too many storms. It belongs to a homestead that was abandoned before Jacob was born, a place where hope once lived and died quietly, leaving behind only the skeleton of dreams. He's used this barn before, a way station where stolen cattle can rest while he waits for the heat to pass. The building leans against the wind like an old man burdened by memory, its walls scarred by decades of weather and time. Jacob guides his horse closer, the stolen herd following with the dumb faithfulness of creatures who have learned not to question where they're led. As he dismounts, the leather of his saddle creaks like old bones, and he can smell the familiar scent of hay gone to dust and wood that has weathered too many seasons. The barn door hangs askew on hinges that have forgotten how to sing, and Jacob pushes it open with a sound like a sigh escaping from the earth itself. Inside, the air is thick with the ghosts of harvest past, and shafts of dying light filter through gaps in the walls, painting everything in shades of golden shadow. He's about to lead the cattle inside when he hears it, a sound so soft it might be mistaken for the wind, but Jacob has learned to listen to the spaces between silence. It's a chain, metal against metal, with the rhythm of someone breathing, someone alive in a place where life shouldn't be. Jacob's hand moves instinctively to the gun at his hip, but something in the sound stops him. It's not the rattle of a trap or the preparation of an ambush. It's the sound of captivity, of someone bound against their will, and suddenly Jacob's stolen cattle seem like the least of his concerns. He moves deeper into the barn, following the sound through shadows that seem to thicken with each step, until he sees her. She's perhaps 16, maybe younger, with dark hair that falls across her face like a curtain drawn against the world. Her wrists are bound with chains that have worn grooves in the wooden beam above her head, and her dress, once white, now the color of dust and desperation, hangs on her small frame like a shroud. She doesn't look up when Jacob approaches, but her breathing changes, becomes more careful, as if she's learned to make herself smaller in the presence of strangers. There's something in her stillness that speaks of damage deeper than chains, of wounds that can't be seen but never heal. Jacob stops just outside the circle of her reach, and for a long moment neither of them moves. The cattle outside shift restlessly, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote calls to its pack. But inside the barn, the silence stretches like a held breath. When Jacob finally speaks, his voice is softer than he intended, roughened by years of hard living, but gentled by something he thought he'd lost long ago. "How long have you been here?" "I'm not going to hurt you," he says, and the words taste strange in his mouth because he's been hurting people for so long. Not directly, perhaps, but stealing a man's cattle is stealing his livelihood, his future, his children's inheritance. Yet looking at this girl, chained and silent in the gathering darkness, Jacob feels something shift inside him, a weight redistributing itself across his soul. The girl's eyes finally meet his, and Jacob sees in them a landscape of suffering that makes his own troubles seem small by comparison. Her eyes are the color of storm clouds, dark and heavy with unshed rain, and they hold an intelligence that hasn't been broken despite whatever has been done to her. She opens her mouth as if to speak, then closes it, and Jacob understands with a clarity that cuts through him like cold steel. "You can't speak," he says, and it's not a question. The girl nods once, a movement so slight it might be mistaken for a tremor, but Jacob catches it. He's always been good at reading the unspoken, at understanding what people can't or won't say aloud. It served him well in his chosen profession, helping him know when a mark is about to bolt or when a sheriff is getting too close. Now looking at this girl, he feels that same intuition telling him something that makes his stolen cattle seem like nothing more than a distraction from what really matters. "Someone put you here," he says. And again, it's not a question. The girl's response is in her eyes, in the way they flicker toward the barn door, and then back to his face, in the way her fingers tighten around the chains, as if they're the only solid thing in a world that has proven unreliable. Jacob has spent 15 years learning to read the signs of fear, and he sees it now in every line of her body, in the way she holds herself ready to endure whatever comes next. The light outside is fading, and Jacob knows he should be thinking about the cattle, about the route north toward the territories where questions aren't asked and money talks louder than conscience. But he can't look away from this girl, can't ignore the way her presence has changed the very air in the barn, made it heavier with possibility and lighter with something that might be hope. "My name is Jacob," he says, settling down on a crate a few feet away from her, close enough to talk but far enough to let her know he's not a threat. "I was just passing through, planning to rest my animals here for the night. I didn't expect to find anyone." The girl watches him with those storm cloud eyes, and Jacob can see her trying to decide whether to trust him or to retreat further into the silence that has become her protection. He understands the dilemma. He's been making the same choice for 15 years, deciding whether to trust or to run, whether to believe in the possibility of redemption or to accept that some choices can't be undone. "I'm not a good man," Jacob continues, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "I've done things, taken things that weren't mine to take, but I'm not the kind of man who leaves someone chained up in a barn." He pauses, letting the words settle between them like dust after a storm. "Whatever brought you here, whoever did this to you, it ends now." The girl's eyes widen, and for the first time since he found her, Jacob sees something other than resignation in her expression. It's a dangerous emotion, hope, and he knows it better than most. Hope has led him down more dark paths than despair ever could, has made him believe in possibilities that existed only in his imagination. But looking at this girl, seeing the way she straightens slightly at his words, Jacob thinks that maybe hope is worth the risk. Outside, the cattle are settling down for the night, and somewhere in the distance, Jacob can hear the sound of horses approaching. His hand moves to his gun, but he doesn't draw it. Instead, he looks at the girl, at the chains that bind her wrists, and makes a decision that will change everything that comes after. "Someone's coming," he says quietly. "Someone who probably put you here, and I'm guessing they won't be happy to find me." He stands, moving closer to the girl, and for the first time she doesn't shrink away from him. "I'm going to get you out of those chains, but I need you to trust me, and I need you to be ready to run when I say run." The girl nods, and in that simple gesture, Jacob sees the beginning of something he hasn't felt in 15 years. The possibility of doing something right, of making a choice that serves something greater than his own survival. The sound of approaching horses grows louder, and Jacob knows that whatever happens next will determine not just the girl's fate, but his own. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small metal file, a tool he's carried for years for purposes he's never been proud of. Now, as he begins to work on the chains that bind the girl's wrists, Jacob feels the weight of his past and the promise of his future balanced on the edge of a moment that seems to stretch toward eternity. The metal yields slowly, grudgingly, and with each link that falls away, Jacob feels something loosening in his own chest, some chain of his own making beginning to break. The horses are closer now, and Jacob can hear voices, men's voices, rough and impatient. The girl's eyes dart toward the sound, and Jacob sees terror there, but also something else, determination. The kind of strength that comes from surviving things that should have broken her, from finding ways to endure when endurance seems impossible. The last link falls away, and the girl's hands are free. She rubs her wrists where the chains have left their marks, and Jacob sees that her fingers are strong despite her ordeal, that whatever has been done to her hasn't stolen her will to fight. She looks at him with those storm cloud eyes, and Jacob sees a question there, a need to understand why a stranger would risk everything to help her. "Because," Jacob says, answering the question she can't ask, "some things are worth more than the price of safety." He moves toward the barn door, listening to the approaching riders. "And because I'm tired of being the kind of man who runs from doing what's right." The sound of hoofbeats fills the air now, and Jacob knows that whatever comes next will test everything he's learned about survival, about choice, about the thin line between the man he's been and the man he might still become. But as he looks back at the girl, standing free in the golden light that filters through the barn's weathered walls, Jacob feels something he hasn't felt in 15 years. The possibility of redemption, earned not through prayer or penance, but through the simple act of choosing to do right when doing wrong would be easier. The barn door begins to swing open, and Jacob steps forward to meet whatever comes next. Knowing that the boy who once worked his father's land and the man who has spent 15 years running from his choices are about to become something entirely new. Behind him, the girl moves like a shadow, ready to run or fight or whatever else survival demands. And Jacob feels the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a mantle he's finally ready to wear. The riders are here, and the real test is about to begin. Marcus Whitmore dismounts from his horse like a man who owns the ground beneath his feet, and Jacob recognizes him immediately, not just from the cattle he stole, but from the way he carries himself, the way he expects the world to bend to his will. Behind him are three men, ranch hands by their look, but Jacob can see the hardness in their eyes that speaks of duties beyond herding cattle. They're the kind of men who do what needs doing without asking too many questions. And Jacob knows that whatever has brought Whitmore here tonight, it's not going to end with conversation. Well, Whitmore says, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man who's never been told no. Jacob Thorne, if I'm not mistaken, the famous cattle rustler who's been making life difficult for honest ranchers across 3 counties. He looks around the barn, taking in the stolen cattle, the girl standing silent in the shadows. Though I have to say, I didn't expect to find you here. This is convenient. Jacob keeps his hands visible, away from his gun, but his body is coiled like a spring, ready to move if he needs to. Whitmore, he says, and there's no surprise in his voice because he's learned that showing weakness to men like Whitmore is the same as inviting them to take everything you have. I was just passing through. Your cattle needed rest, and this seemed like a good place to stop. My cattle, Whitmore repeats, and there's something in his tone that makes Jacob's skin crawl. Yes, well, we'll deal with that presently, but first I believe you've met my property. He gestures toward the girl, and Jacob feels something cold settle in his stomach. Sarah here has been uncooperative lately. I was hoping a few days alone might improve her attitude. The girl, Sarah, steps deeper into the shadows, but Jacob can see her clearly, can see the way she holds herself when Whitmore speaks her name. It's the posture of someone who has learned to make herself small, to disappear when predators are near. But there's something else there too, something that wasn't there before Jacob freed her from the chains. A readiness, a coiled tension that suggests she's not planning to go quietly. Property, Jacob repeats, and the word tastes like poison in his mouth. That's an interesting way to describe a person. She's my ward, Whitmore says, his voice taking on the tone of a man explaining something to a child. Her father owed me a considerable debt when he died. The girl is compensation. He smiles, and Jacob sees in that smile the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never having to answer for your actions. Of course, she's proven to be more trouble than she's worth. Can't speak, you see. Makes it difficult to know what she's thinking. One of the ranch hands, a thick-set man with scars on his knuckles, steps forward. Boss, maybe we should just handle this the easy way. Thorne here's got a price on his head, and the girl, well, she's been nothing but problems since her old man died. Patience, Tom, Whitmore says, his eyes never leaving Jacob's face. Mr. Thorne and I are having a conversation about stolen cattle, about trespassing, about the various ways a man can find himself on the wrong side of the law. He pauses, letting the implications sink in. Of course, sometimes these things can be worked out between reasonable men. Jacob understands perfectly. Whitmore is offering him a choice. Walk away from the girl, forget what he's seen, and maybe there's a deal to be made about the cattle. It's the kind of pragmatic arrangement that Jacob has made 100 times before, the kind of moral compromise that has kept him alive and free for 15 years. But as he looks at Sarah, standing in the shadows with those storm cloud eyes, Jacob realizes that some compromises cost more than they're worth. The girl comes with me, Jacob says, his voice quiet but steady. The cattle. We can work something out, but she's not going back with you. Whitmore's smile doesn't waver, but something cold flickers in his eyes. I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Thorne. Sarah belongs to me, legally and completely. Her father's debts pass to her, and she'll work them off in whatever capacity I see fit. He takes a step closer, and Jacob can smell the whiskey on his breath, the scent of a man who's used to getting his way. But I'm prepared to be generous. Take your cattle and go. Leave the girl, and we'll call it even. Sarah moves then, stepping out of the shadows, and Jacob sees that she's picked up a piece of broken wood, a makeshift weapon that won't do much good against four armed men, but shows that she's not planning to surrender without a fight. Her eyes meet Jacob's, and in them he sees a question that cuts straight to the heart of who he is and who he wants to be. "No," Jacob says, and the word seems to echo in the barn like a gunshot. "The girl comes with me, or nobody leaves here tonight." The ranch hands shift, hands moving toward their weapons, but Whitmore raises a hand to stop them. "Mr. Thorne, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and frankly, fighting over a broken girl who can't even speak seems like a poor way to end what could be a profitable evening for both of us." "She's not broken," Jacob says, his voice carrying a certainty that surprises even him. "She's survived. There's a difference." "Survived?" Whitmore laughs, a sound like breaking glass. "She's been in that barn for 3 days, chained like an animal, and she hasn't made a sound. If that's not broken, I don't know what is." Jacob looks at Sarah, sees the way she holds herself, the way her fingers grip the piece of wood like she knows how to use it. He spent 15 years learning to read people, to understand what they're capable of when pushed to their limits, and everything about Sarah tells him that she's been pushed as far as she can go. But instead of breaking, she's become something harder, something that can't be owned or controlled. "She's been waiting," Jacob says, his hand moving slowly toward his gun. "Waiting for someone to give her a reason to fight." The barn fills with tension, thick as smoke, and Jacob can feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. 4 against 2, with one of the two unable to speak and armed with nothing but a piece of broken wood. By any rational calculation, it's suicide. But Jacob has learned that some things can't be calculated, that sometimes the right choice is the one that makes no sense at all. "Tom," Whitmore says quietly, "I think Mr. Thorne needs some persuasion." The scarred ranch hand draws his gun, smooth and practiced, but Jacob is already moving. 15 years of living on the edge has taught him to recognize the moment when talking ends and surviving begins, and he's learned to trust his instincts when everything else fails. His own gun clears leather a heartbeat after Tom's, and the barn explodes into violence. The first shot comes from Tom's gun, but Jacob is already diving to the side, rolling behind a pile of old hay bales. The bullet splinters wood above his head, and he can hear Whitmore shouting orders, the other ranch hands spreading out to surround him. But Jacob isn't thinking about them anymore. He's thinking about Sarah, about the way she looked at him when he said she wasn't broken, about the trust she placed in a stranger who had every reason to abandon her. Another shot, this one from Jacob's gun, and Tom staggers backward, clutching his shoulder. The man's gun falls from nerveless fingers, and Jacob hears him cursing, sees him reaching for a second weapon with his good hand. But then Sarah moves, quick as a striking snake, and the piece of wood in her hand connects with Tom's temple. He goes down hard and doesn't get back up. "You little—" another ranch hand starts to say, turning his gun towards Sarah, but Jacob puts a bullet in his chest before he can finish the sentence. The man drops like a puppet with its strings cut, and suddenly the odds are much better. Whitmore has his own gun out now, and he's backing toward the barn door, using the third ranch hand as cover. "This is insane, Thorne. You're throwing your life away for a girl who can't even thank you." "Maybe," Jacob says, reloading with practiced efficiency. "But I'm tired of living a life that's not worth throwing away." The third ranch hand makes his move, rushing Jacob's position with gun blazing, but Jacob is ready for him. The man's shots go wide, panic making him sloppy, and Jacob's answering shot takes him in the heart. He falls across the hay bales, and suddenly the barn is quiet except for the sound of breathing and the distant lowing of cattle. Whitmore is alone now, his gun pointed at Sarah, and Jacob can see the calculation in his eyes. He's weighing his options, trying to decide whether to kill the girl out of spite or try to use her as a hostage. But Sarah isn't waiting for him to decide. She's moving again, rolling away from his line of fire, and Jacob sees his chance. The shot takes Whitmore in the shoulder, spinning him around, and his gun goes flying. He hits the ground hard, clutching his wounded arm, and Jacob is there before he can recover, kicking the dropped weapon away into the darkness. "It's over," Jacob says, his gun trained on Whitmore's head. "The girl comes with me." Whitmore looks up at him, his face pale with shock and blood loss. "You don't understand," he gasps. "She's nothing. Nobody. Her father was a drunk who died owing me money, and she's just paying his debts." "Maybe," Jacob says, helping Sarah to her feet, "but that's not your choice to make anymore." Sarah looks at Whitmore, and Jacob sees something in her eyes that makes him step back. It's not hatred, not revenge, but something deeper and more complex. She approaches the wounded man, and Jacob tenses, ready to intervene if necessary. But Sarah doesn't hurt him. Instead, she reaches into her dress and pulls out a small object, a locket, tarnished with age. She opens it, and Jacob sees a photograph inside, a picture of a man and a young girl. Sarah shows it to Whitmore, and Jacob sees recognition dawn in the wounded man's eyes. "Your father," Whitmore whispers. He said you were his greatest treasure, worth more than all the gold in the ground." Sarah nods, and Jacob understands. This isn't just about debt or property or legal ownership. This is about a father's love for his daughter, about promises made and broken, about the way men like Whitmore twist everything they touch into something ugly and wrong. Sarah closes the locket and puts it back in her dress. Then she looks at Jacob, and he sees a question in her eyes, a need to know what comes next. Jacob doesn't have an answer, not really. He's a cattle rustler, a man with a price on his head, and she's a girl who's been through more than anyone should have to endure. But as he looks at her, Jacob realizes that maybe the answer isn't about what they are, but about what they might become. "We need to go," he says, offering her his hand, before more of his men show up. Sarah takes his hand, and Jacob feels something pass between them, a connection that goes deeper than words. They move toward the barn door, leaving Whitmore bleeding on the ground, and Jacob feels the weight of his old life falling away like chains finally broken. Outside, the cattle are restless, disturbed by the gunfire, and Jacob knows he has a choice to make. He can take them north, sell them, and use the money to start over somewhere else. Or he can let them go, send them back to where they belong, and trust that doing the right thing will somehow be enough. Sarah is watching him, and Jacob sees in her eyes that she understands the choice he's making. She nods once, and Jacob feels a peace he hasn't known in 15 years settle over him like a benediction. He opens the pen and drives the cattle out into the night, watching them disappear into the darkness that will eventually carry them home. It's the first time in 15 years that Jacob has given something back instead of taking it away, and the feeling is so foreign and so right that he has to stop and breathe for a moment. Sarah is beside him, and when he looks at her, Jacob sees that she's crying. Not from sadness, but from something else. Something that looks like relief and hope and the possibility of a future that doesn't have to be defined by the past. "We should go," Jacob says, his voice rough with emotion. "There's a town about 2 days' ride north. They won't know us there. Won't ask questions about where we came from." Sarah nods, and Jacob helps her onto his horse. As they ride away from the barn, away from the blood and the violence and the life that Jacob has been living for 15 years, he feels something shift inside him. The man who stole cattle and ran from his conscience is dying, and in his place something new is being born. Something that Sarah's silence has taught him to recognize as valuable. They ride through the night, and as the sun begins to rise over the horizon, Jacob sees a town in the distance, small and quiet and full of possibility. He doesn't know what they'll find there, doesn't know how they'll make a life together. A wanted man and a girl who can't speak, two people who've been broken by the world in different ways. But as Sarah's arms tighten around his waist and he feels her breathing against his back, Jacob knows that they'll find a way. Because sometimes redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to build something better from the pieces that remain. And sometimes the most important words are the ones that are never spoken, the ones that live in the spaces between heartbeats, in the touch of a hand, in the simple act of staying when running would be easier. The town grows larger as they approach, and Jacob can see smoke rising from chimneys, the signs of people beginning their day. He doesn't know what they'll think of him and Sarah, doesn't know if they'll find acceptance or suspicion or something in between. But for the first time in 15 years, Jacob isn't running from something. He's running toward it, toward the possibility of a life that's worth more than the sum of its mistakes. Sarah shifts behind him, and Jacob feels her hand rest against his heart. It's a simple gesture, but it carries the weight of everything they've been through, everything they've survived, everything they hope to become. And in that touch, Jacob hears the words she can't speak, the promise that they'll face whatever comes next together. The sun climbs higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Jacob Thorne rides toward his future with a girl who's taught him that some things are worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than the fear of being caught. They ride toward a town that might offer them a chance to start over, and Jacob knows that whatever happens next, he's finally become the man his father would have wanted him to be. The cattle rustler is dead, and in his place rides a man who's learned that the greatest treasure isn't gold or silver or stolen livestock, but the simple act of choosing to do right when doing wrong would be easier. And beside him rides a girl who survived the worst the world can offer and emerged not broken, but stronger, not bitter, but hopeful. They ride toward the morning, toward the future, toward the possibility of redemption earned not through prayer or penance, but through the simple act of saving someone else when you thought you were beyond saving yourself. And in the growing light of dawn, Jacob Thorne finally understands what his father meant when he said that the measure of a man isn't in what he takes from the world, but in what he gives back. The road ahead is long and uncertain, but for the first time in 15 years, Jacob isn't afraid of where it leads, because he's not traveling it alone, and sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.